Welcome back to the On Helix Digital Conference, hoping you had a good break. We are now moving on to our next panel discussion, future-proofing research funding. With an industry under the spotlight, we have seen a lot of money poured in life sciences as crisis management from governments and rightly opportunistically from the private sector. All of that being really good news, of course, but the question our panel will discuss today is how to ensure this money is optimized on the right topics, the right elements of the value chain, and with the right mechanisms to enable the best life science research to be delivered with the best impact. So I would like to invite our panel chair, Pamela Tranter, who is head of Translational Research Group at UCL, who will lead this very important discussion and introduce our panelists. As before, please use the chat box if you would like to ask any question to the panel. And Pamela, over to you now.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to this panel on future-proofing research funding. I'd like to thank One Nucleus for the opportunity to chair this panel, which has a wealth of diverse experience across public, charity and private organisations. First, I will introduce myself and then I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves to you. So I'm Pamela Tranter. I work at UCL, which is obviously one of the leading universities globally in research, education, innovation and biomedical translation. At UCL, I head a team within the Translational Research Office. We support clinicians and academics in all disease areas and modalities to move their projects from the preclinical to the clinical stages. The support is understanding the development path and also helping to seek funding, then project managing these awards. My team are really mainly ex-industry. I worked for many years for Novartis on small molecules and biologics. So our aim is to bring that industry experience into the academic setting. We mainly access public funds such as MRC, Translational Pathway Funding, Wellcome Trust, NIHR funding projects, and also some industry and VC funding. So I'd like to ask the panel to introduce themselves and also the organisation that they represent. So if we can start first with Bernie Hannigan, please.
Thank you, Pamela. Hello, everybody. I'm Bernie Hannigan, Director of Research, Translation and Innovation at Public Health England. At PHE, we undertake a lot of research funded from diverse sources. So, for example, the National Institute for Health Research, health protection research units enable partnerships in a significant investment with universities. Through our own intellectual property, we also have significant income that helps support some of the services that we deliver. From the 1st of October, PHE will join with NHS Test and Trace to form the UK Health Security Agency, and with science and research at our core, we will interact even more strongly with industry, with the NHS, with universities and with the public to protect against threats to health, both nationally and internationally. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. Pete Jackson, please.
Thanks, Pamela, and hi, everyone. It's a great opportunity, and thanks to One Nucleus for arranging this. I'm Pete Jackson. I'm the Chief Exec of a private company called Infex Therapeutics, which used to be called the AMR Centre, based up in the northwest of England at Alderley Park, as you might expect, focused on new therapeutics for infectious diseases. I've created 8 biotech companies over the past 15 years after a career in industry research management, and I've recently been appointed as the non-executive chair of the Norwich Research Park, which is an exciting opportunity. And on the AMR, antimicrobial resistance agenda, I'm a senior advisor to the Milken Institute in Washington, DC, and I'm on the UK NICE, National Health England, reimbursement trial, so very heavily involved in the policy and politics and international diplomacy around creating a new pipeline of antimicrobials.
Thank you. Richard Hebden.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you very much to One Nucleus for the opportunity to come and speak today. So my name's Richard Hebden. I'm Director of Health and Life Sciences at Innovate UK. Innovate UK is the nation's innovation agency, and since 2018 we've been part of UK Research and Innovation, which includes the research councils as well, as many of you will be familiar with. We have obviously had a huge historic investment in the health and life sciences space. So as of January 2020, that was in the order of 1.2 billion invested into programmatic R&D funding, catapults, centres, and other programs. We cover a wide range of health and life science thematic areas, from vaccines and AMR to precision medicine, health technologies, medtech, and advanced therapies. Interesting time for us as we go forward to the spending review 2021, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. And finally over to Morag Foreman.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you to the One Nucleus team for the opportunity to join the panel today. I'm Morag Foreman, a senior partner in the translation team at the Wellcome Trust. I'm interested in structures that facilitate translation and further societal impact from research. So thinking about all aspects of translation and routes to impact, and not just technology transfer. Most recently at Wellcome, I've led the development of Wellcome's Translational Partnerships, an institutional focused initiative across the UK and internationally, which has resulted in a significant increase in discovery researchers engaging in translation of their research and increasingly engaged translational culture in institutions. I've also had significant hands-on translational project experience from very early opportunities right through to those in clinical trials, both in academic and biotech sector.
Thank you, Morag. Thanks, everyone. That's great. I'm sure everyone can see we've got a lot of experience and knowledge on this panel, which I hope you'll put to good use. Really, just to reiterate what I think we've heard earlier in this conference, one of the many consequences of the pandemic has been such a focus and awareness of life sciences by the whole population. I found this amazing, actually, seeing my day job on the news every day, you know, and just with family and friends, we're discussing vaccines and variants, which is just kind of unusual, but it's made me very proud of the work I do. Just highlighted by Anthony Brown earlier in his keynote, there is more understanding also across government as well as the general public in the importance of life sciences and need to support them. And clearly, that, you know, we've heard some very large numbers in terms of the significant investments there have been, particularly in the biotech space. However, you know, this is against the backdrop of a potential recession, and many funding bodies are facing really challenging times. Particularly, for example, small charities have, you know, haven't even been able to fundraise in the last year. And certainly, you know, from my perspective, many academic projects rely on that charity funding to really get them started. So I think this is a real issue. So what I'd like to do is to use this discussion to look at initiatives that, you know, that are available, but also to think about what the gaps are, particularly in light of the pandemic, and explore how these could be addressed. To the audience, please do submit questions to the chat, because we're very keen to address what you want to hear about as well. So to start off with, if I can turn to Morag first. So, you know, there's been an awful lot of investment, but there still seems to me there's an awful lot of research and innovation that is in academia, and it really struggles to get that initial funding to progress. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts about how this could be tackled.
Thank you, Pamela. And I think that's a great observation. I think it comes down to being able to nurture and support early translation from research at different stages of the translational journey, and perhaps at an institutional level, building and growing portfolios of translational opportunities which serve to attract industry or other players. I think to do this, we need to adopt a more holistic approach to supporting translation that plays to the research strengths and the opportunities of a local university ecosystem and their researchers. In the introduction, I touched a bit upon the translational partnerships we've developed at Wellcome. We've got 22 of those across the UK and in Europe, although they're predominantly in the UK. And they were really to draw out some of the exciting discoveries and new ideas coming out of academic research, and to encourage greater translation to health impact, which is, of course, Wellcome's interest. We recognise that always providing money to individual researchers was an important thing, but actually was not always necessary or sufficient to enable effective translation. So rather than working with individuals, we worked at an institutional level to co-design a number of partnerships to really play to the opportunities that universities and institutions had. And when I reflect, I think a number of key themes come out of that. That is that what has benefited is access to expertise, embedded translational project management. I think, Pamela, that's probably something you're acutely aware of for yourself and your team at UCL. Having those skills embedded in a university that are complementary to academic research really can serve to plan and drive translation forward. Having appropriate training and mentorship for academics, and building networks, not only across an institution, but within the UK of what translation looks like, and play to those strengths. And although these partnerships have been in place for 4 years, we are seeing a significant increase in researchers engaging in translation. But actually, we're now seeing an increase an increase in translational funding and other metrics to help these ideas come forward. So we are seeing a change, but I think it really comes down to working with academics and really supporting translation more than technology transfer, and nurturing those ideas.
Thanks, Morag. I must admit the award that we've had at UCL has been really revolutionary. It's made such a difference in terms of particularly the training for a lot of our early career researchers. But I think in many ways you provide a little bit of funding and then you realise how many gaps there are and you need even more. So I must admit, we are desperately in need of so much more funding. Can I turn to the other members of the panels if you'd like to comment on this? Bernie, please.
Yes, and thinking about how we have been working differently during the COVID era thus far. So fully agree with Morag about the need for connectedness, and this meeting today has focused a lot on ecosystems, and let's use the word ourselves as well at this very broad panel. So, for example, obviously PHE has been in the front line in helping the population and clinicians, etc., to use the best evidence to mitigate against the impacts of the pandemic. And so what we have found is that we have very quickly uncovered evidence gaps. So what we have been doing is collating the evidence gaps, systematically reviewing the literature very quickly. So a need for skills in that arena, identifying what are the evidence gaps, sharing that with funders, and actually the many different research funders working together, sharing their portfolio so that in close to real time, we can see what projects are being funded, by whom, where, and then to see the outcomes as they emerge. And I think to a person outside of the system that we work in, these might seem like absolute no-brainers, but they really have not been happening in normal pre-COVID days. Let's hope we can keep working together so closely in the future.
Thanks, Bernie. Pete?
Yeah, thanks. Some really good questions and answers. I'd just like to bring out the fact that the private sector, private companies, financial companies, insurance companies have billions and if not trillions under management. And I feel that we're not very effective at mobilizing those resources into the earlier stages of translation. Piece of work that we're doing with Milken at the moment is looking at the potential for a thing called blended finance, where you have different asset classes, different funders taking on different elements of the risk. And I think there is huge potential for getting these extremely large private sector financial organizations involved earlier in the life sciences industry by taking away some of the risk. I mean, it's obvious the reason why they don't invest yours and my pension fund money in very early stage assets, just because of the high risks and the high degree of attrition. But instead of maybe just giving out grant funding, maybe the government could be a more active investor in pulling together and de-risking those early stage investments for some of these large financial companies. But it's a very early stage of the work that we're doing, and I think Innovate UK had a go at this by pre-packaging some grant funding together with a panel of early stage venture funders, which was an innovation at the time. But I think there's a lot more to be done, and mobilizing private capital, I think, is going to be essential. It was private capital that, alongside government investment, that has made such an impact on the response to COVID. And I think we can do this in other therapeutic areas as well.
Yeah, thank you. No, those are really excellent points. Richard, did you want to pick that one up as well?
Yeah, sure thing. And yeah, thanks to Pete for bringing up the subject of the investor partnerships and investment accelerator work that we've done previously, where we've co-invested with VCs, firstly in broadly in the health and life sciences area, and then later in the precision medicine space, and that's something that we're looking to evolve and adapt as we go forward. We're quite keen to do more in the health investors partnership space, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities to develop those models going forward. We'll have to see what comes out of the spending review this autumn, but there's also complementary work, of course, going on through the British Business Bank, which is looking sort of a little bit later in the investment cycle, and then also Innovate UK leads on the iCure program.
I think we may have lost Richard temporarily there.
Pamela, it's Pete. Can I just pick up on something that Richard was getting into there with the early efforts in blended finance? Yeah, it's really important to also identify where the areas of unmet need are. I mean, within life sciences, there are areas that are extremely well funded and well supported by private investors, and where assets are quickly snapped up by the global pharma industry. And there are other areas that are not so developed. So pediatrics, for example, my specific area of antimicrobial resistance, antibiotics, very, very underinvested. So I think it's also about picking the priority areas where there's either a large undeveloped opportunity or where there's significant market failure.
Thanks, Pete. No, that's a really good point. And I also think, you know, I sort of get the academic perspective, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in just engaging with academics and building trust in terms of when their own research work is then invested in externally, that they're not going to lose, whether it's the IP or that connection to that. I think there's still quite a lot of dialogue to be done there as well.
I think it's really important that from my new role at Norwich Research Park, to try and identify the new entrepreneurs of the future, right from sort of first degree, PhD, postdoc level, because by creating enterprises, we'll capture more of that value for the UK rather than having to license outside of the UK. And we see building a more resilient research and development and manufacturing infrastructure is essential in the future, as evidenced by the problems we've seen in COVID.
Yeah. Bernie?
And referencing this unmet need that Pete has mentioned, thinking that so many different academic disciplines and groups of individuals are able to contribute to the solution. So say, for example, bring in anthropologists to understand how communities live and their customs and practices, how individuals behave, etc. It's difficult to think of any academic discipline that doesn't have something to contribute to understanding how a particular need can be met. We must, I think, let's think of researchers in these disciplines as being the future holders and PIs on very significant research funding awards that might in the past have been considered appropriate only to our biomedical leaders.
Thanks, Bernie. Yeah, I think there's one thing we've been really focusing on, which Morag mentioned as well. It's really bringing that training into play. So when people are early in their career, they can start to understand both the commercial aspects, but how you translate something and move it forward, and try to get that dialogue in place so you can actually move something into the clinic is really, really important. I believe we've temporarily lost Richard. Hopefully he will be able to rejoin us. I wanted to pick up another question. It's similar, but really I wanted to discuss a bit about models of sort of academic industry collaborations. Obviously in the Cambridge area, which I think a lot of the participants are from, you've got the Milner Institute, for example, who's been really successful, particularly because they are co-located and with all different science parks, Cambridge University and the hospitals. And they've really set their mission to transform academic research into clinical applications by linking those academics to industry. I just wondered what your thoughts are on this model or other models that could be put in place, because this is very much sort of pre that really large investment that Pete was talking about earlier. So can I go to you first, Pete? Thank you.
Yeah, we've been really pleased to receive one of the first awards from the UKRI Strength in Places Fund, which is a combination of the government's place-based strategy, rebalancing the economy, and also increasing the investment in R&D. So the Strength in Places awarded 19 million to the Infection Innovation Consortium, which is a group across the Northwest, where there's a centre of excellence in the infectious disease translation. So that's led out of Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine with the university and the hospital, and then a bunch of private sector organisations at Alderley Park and across Cheshire and the region, including ourselves at Infex, and Unilever as a major contributor as well, and Evatech. And the real key there was, as you already mentioned about the Milner Institute, although we're not all on the same site, but it's bringing together a network across the NHS and the universities and the private sector and philanthropic funding as well. It's bringing that consortium together, where we all had individual relationships, maybe one-to-one relationships, but this funding gave us the ability to put the umbrella in place. And on the back of the 19 million, we've now leveraged over 150 million of additional funding over 5 years. So it's a tremendous story, and I think it's that combination of a consortium, research and development, and place that was a compelling proposition to government.
Thank you. Yes, I'd be interested to know how this could be spread to other places. You know, because obviously you've got that centre around Cambridge, but you know, there's a bit of a sort of similar thing in London with MedCity and also in Oxford. But it's whether we have lots of almost consortia like this around the country, or there's a way of actually linking them all up. So if what Milner's done.
I mean, it's clearly there's a strong sort of levelling up agenda behind Strength in Places as well. So quite naturally, they've spread the funding around the UK, and the strength in places was obviously not just for life science. It was across all sectors. But I think that what we feel at the ICON leadership board is that this isn't the end result. This is the start point, and that we're already starting to build relationships out from that to other parts of the UK where we can bring new people in and opportunities for new leverage funding.
That's great, thank you. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I think Pete covered the rest of your bit, so that's okay. And we're starting to get some questions coming in on the chat, actually. So there's another one to Pete, actually. So this is really following up your comments about investing much earlier in life sciences by some of these investors. And it's really, how can we, increase the appetite for private investors to support really early stage research?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is the crux of the project that's ongoing at the Milken Institute. They're looking at across not just the US Institute, not just the US, but looking at it globally. Some of it actually doesn't cost governments a lot because it's policy. Then there are other things that can be done, like tax reliefs and so on, that eventually do cost money, but it's not a direct cash expenditure today. So just an example, in the UK, a lot of life sciences early stage companies benefit from SEIS and EIS investments, which are tax reliefs for high net worth individuals. They have a peak, an optimum exit time of 3 years. So the maximum tax benefits crystallize after 3 years. And for most early stage life science investments, that's nowhere near the time that companies are going to be generating returns. So policy shifts in areas like that could, with greater tax incentives, the longer an investment's held, or for higher risk type investments, could be done with tweaks in policy. But I think as I mentioned earlier, the real key to unlocking large amounts is by governments being much more active in creating investment vehicles, rather than just giving grants to companies and then the companies have to go out and raise equity for the match funding. Can governments with philanthropy and different investors with different risk appetites put together these tiered financing structures so that governments maybe absorb the first loss on an investment, but that would significantly de-risk it for more investors with a lower risk appetite. So a lot more work to be done, and it's very early stages of that type of debate, but I think it's particularly exciting as an opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that it'll be interesting to see how it develops, really. Does any of the panel have anything they'd like to add on that one, or we can move? Yeah, Morag.
I completely agree with what Pete said, and I just wanted to sort of add a comment from perhaps the other end of the spectrum, if you like, sort of focused much on the academic research environment. And I think one of the models that's working very well in the UK at the moment is at the Francis Crick Institute, where actually they've got embedded industry scientists alongside, some of the best discovery researchers in the UK. And I think there is an appetite from industry to engage early. And I think to touch upon some of the themes that Pete brought out, it's about building those relationships and that understanding that's leading to fruitful collaborations. And I think we're seeing that very successfully at the Crick, even though there is a very strong open science focus to those collaborations. And you're seeing large organisations like GSK through their Link Labs, and indeed earlier this year, Merck Sharp Dome collaborating with them. So I think there's different approaches, but I think a common theme is about building those relationships and that collaboration and carrying some of the risk. But from an academic point of view and an early research point of view, I think the CRIC is a really good model to show the value of really cutting edge discovery research and that collaboration and the value collaboration with industry can have to maximise the impact of research.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the CRIC is an absolutely great example. I think that's a really good point to make.
And any one of these models or partnerships actually takes quite a long time to embed, to be understood by others, and to reap rewards. So, case studies and stories and updates about what is working, what has not worked, what to avoid, what to go for are really, really important, lest we all repeat each other's slow steps.
Thank you. Yes. I'd like to go to another question now. So obviously we've talked about attracting really quite large investors, but if you've got areas that, which I think obviously is very much in the forefront of our minds at the moment, that maybe aren't that commercially attractive, but they offer really significant patient benefit and public health improvement, how do we tackle these? If I can come to you, Morag, first for that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is a really interesting area and something that I'm personally very interested in. As you touched upon, I don't think all translation will result in a commercial product, but of course, lots will. But there are multiple routes to impact, changes to policy, guidelines, social impact ventures, even operating in areas of market failure or no profit. And these are not necessarily that easy to drive forward, but as you touched upon, Pamela, it really could significantly benefit healthcare or society. I think I wanted to make a couple of comments. Last month, we saw the announcement of Impact 12, a 10-year multi-million-pound fund to support social ventures with a range of universities across the UK. That's being led by Oxford University Innovation. So obviously a leading technology transfer organisation in the UK, but is really being developed by Social Investment Scotland, an impact investor who's looking to use innovative finance models. So I think there is appetite, and I think there will be increasing opportunities to develop these. And even within Wellcome, our mission is for impact and for healthcare impact. However, that impact is created, and moving forward under our new strategy, we're going to focus efforts in 3 healthcare challenge areas: in infectious disease, mental health, and climate and health. And through these, we're going to take a strategic view of the challenges and how you can deliver impact in these areas, and that won't be motivated at all by a financial return. Indeed, we're going to look to support a range of approaches under each of these umbrellas, from new interventions to late stage discovery, policy, advocacy, health systems, really looking at a very rounded approach to tackling healthcare problems in these areas. So I think it's something that I hope to see increasing appetite for within the UK ecosystem. And I hope that with organisations like Wellcome increasingly supporting translation in defined areas, but also the likes of Impact 12, there will be more opportunities to drive these types of what can be extremely valuable opportunities forward for society.
Thank you. Bernie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, increasingly, I think we see the need to involve people and involve communities in decision making about where the research drive is focused. And obviously the topic areas, for example, mental health that Morag has mentioned, have come through evidence of the burden of need in the community. But the involvement of people, the democratization of research is really important. And the initial speaker today, was very focused on the fact that his constituents will benefit from major investments, and they will benefit at the level of individuals and communities in addition to industry and health service, etc., in the country. And I think sometimes this is overlooked perhaps by some researchers, but it is not just a box to tick to say that you have involved people in your study, but really it can fundamentally help you to focus on what will create the greatest impact for people and society.
Yeah, I think patient, really good point. So patient voice is hugely important, and actually it's been one of the significant issues in the antimicrobial resistance field, that there hasn't really been that strong patient voice, because it's been a somewhat of a hidden disease. So quite often patients or the relatives are told that a loved one has complications or pneumonia or something like that. They don't actually realize that it was a drug resistant organism that was the cause of their illness. So I think Wellcome, to their great credit, have stepped in and have taken a huge lead on this whole area of AMR, where there's substantial unmet need, and I think that that also touched on it in other areas. The theme of impact investment is also extremely important. We now see particularly high net worth individuals or their family officers, they're rational investors. They want to make a return, but they also want to make a return in an area where they can also make a social impact. And they're willing to invest for longer, take a lower return, be willing to lose money, maybe a little more in those areas. So I think that type of impact investment is also very, very important to tap into, particularly for earlier stage life science research.
And in addition to the patient voice, which of course is so important, I'll broaden this out to the people who are not yet ill, people and communities to be involved. So many, for example, wonderful charities are great in helping the patient voice to be heard in dealing with the families or the individuals affected by particular ailments. Perhaps that was one of the gaps in AMR. There isn't really a charity dedicated to that. There isn't really a charity organizing the voice of the people who are not yet ill. But so somehow we have to find other democratic mechanisms so that others also have an opportunity to input.
But I think Bernie raises a really good point there. I mean, if we look at some of the big public investments that have happened through things like the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, those, for example, those have often come through unified coalitions of industry, of interested parties, and I think that shows the power of joining up the landscape in the particular industry sector that you work in. To make that case. On the subject of societal impact, that's obviously something Innovate UK we're taking a greater interest in, and thinking about alongside that how you measure impact in that space. So not just economic, being about economic gains, but also where we get a sweet spot where there's a important economic opportunity for UK businesses, but also an opportunity to deliver something important in the healthcare space. And in particular, at the moment, my team's looking at AMR and at child health. The latter area, child health pediatrics, is something we recognise that's a significant gap in terms of funding around the private and public landscape, and historically, has been underinvested in. There is, when you look out there, there's not much in the way of sort of private investment and VCs that work in that space. I have recently been in contact with one in Boston, a company called Springhood Ventures, which has grown out of a philanthropic organization, which is focused purely on child health and has a portfolio of child health companies from therapeutics to medical devices and digital health. And it would be great to see the development of something in that space in the UK side. And we'd certainly, welcome the opportunity to work with organisations like that. But I think there's also a need to invest, in the innovation infrastructure in that space too. It's not just about funding projects and businesses and programmatic R&D, but there needs to be the infrastructure to make it happen. And address some of the, or help address some of the issues around regulation and complexity of medical device development pathways, for example. So I think, it's to some of the earlier comments, it's not just about the money, it's about having the right support mechanisms and the right players involved as well, right from the get-go, from investors, public and private, through to innovators, researchers, and businesses.
There's a really good example that the Medicines Discovery Catapult is taking the lead on with the CF Trust. So there's a consortium that's been built to bring that public and private hospital and university consortium together to actually define exactly what it is that the clinicians and the patients need. And the first thing that they've been doing, which has been great work, is actually to define a number of target product profiles that researchers can then swing into action behind. And so that's a great example in an area that doesn't get perhaps the focus, but they do have a great patient voice. They're a fantastic organisation in the CF Trust.
Yeah, that is a really good example. And it's quite interesting. A lot of our researchers, when we work with them, we ask them to write a target product profile, and then you have to explain what one is. If you could kind of start with that, it would be a better way of doing it. One fund actually I'd like to highlight is the Life Out Philanthropic Fund. I think that's a great one that supports particularly rare diseases, and we found this is really valuable. Not only because obviously it will fund projects that most people don't necessarily want to fund, but also they match it with an element of training and really trying to help the researchers understand that whole pathway. And they do also do joint funding with different charities. So again, you're targeting very specialist areas. And I think that is really, very, really valuable. We've got a question from the audience, which is quite a specific one actually, to do with COVID. Is asking what the panel thinks about the public fund for COVID-19 therapeutics, identifying supporting some of the novel drug development projects. And they quote a JAK1 inhibitor for cytokine storm. I suppose what this is really getting at is that we needed public funding in order to actually get some of these initiatives moving quickly. Richard, can I ask you to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not 100% sure what the question's asking. I think that there's a lot of work going on at the moment across government to think about how we build on all of the investment and activity that's taken place in the COVID-19 space. Innovate UK and UKRI more corporately have been involved very closely in Therapeutics task force and looking at things like repurposing existing drugs and rapidly putting them through clinical trials processes. There's a lot of work that's gone in investment in the vaccines area, of course, and particularly in RNA vaccines, which obviously have the potential to be used in other spaces as well. RNA medicines are broader than vaccines and have a lot of important applications, including in oncology. So I think that's very much a key discussion within government at the moment across Department of Health and Social Care, BAYS and others. We're all involved in these, and hopefully we will see something come out of the spending review in this space. But yeah, it would be good to see us build on the legacy of all this investment.
Thanks, Richard. Just as a follow-up, I was just thinking that, obviously in the times of the pandemic, everyone worked together really quickly, particularly you saw academics industry, with the vaccine come together and I know a lot of companies got really involved really early on in the vaccine space before they had contracts or anything. I mean, do you think this sort of goodwill will continue? I mean, what I don't want us to do is kind of a couple of years' time, we'll sort of put the pandemic behind us, and then we're trying to go into our own little separate areas. You know, is there a feeling that actually we can really build on this and have a more positive, collaborative life sciences space?
Yes, I would say so. That there's certainly an appetite for it within government. I think we have to just pause for a moment and think about the vaccines task force, for example, and what that set out to do and what it was about. And I think there's a temptation at the moment to say, wow, you know, that worked really well. We can therefore apply it everywhere. Obviously, it's worked really well for this purpose, and it's been incredible. We've all seen the TV coverage and read all the articles about it, and seen, directly observed the impacts of it. And there's certainly some lessons learned there in terms of how we do work together. I mean, it wasn't the only example of where industry and government and the research base came together. We had the ventilator challenge as well early on in the pandemic, where industry, not just med tech companies, but also Formula One and other businesses, the unusual suspects, all came together to work with government to develop, test and scale and manufacture ventilators. And again, there was an important piece there around the regulatory work that was done to have a very rapid but still comprehensive regulatory review process, which just illustrates that, the importance of bringing all the right actors together. But yeah, certainly, I think we've certainly taken on board a lot of the lessons learned. We'd like to see those applied, but don't forget, some of these things are, of their nature, short-term, designed to solve specific problems. I think when you start to talk about, let's have a Manhattan project for cancer, for example, I think that's a non-starter. But I think for specific things, yeah, task force type approaches, I think, are going to be the way forward.
Yeah. A point I'd like to make here is that, yeah, loads of things swung into action, and it's a fantastic collective effort. Not everything worked, but thankfully things did work. The point I'd like to make, though, is that the organisations that swung into action stopped doing other things. So one of the things I've picked up from a company that we work with is that they're now looking at a 4-year lead time to get into manufacturing capacity for a therapeutic protein, because all the capacity in the world's been swamped with the COVID vaccine manufacture. So I absolutely agree with Richard that we need to take a bit of a breather, because we need to fix the infrastructure before we start investing in more new programs, because it's really highlighted the need for a significantly improved UK translational infrastructure. And the other thing that Richard mentioned as well, and that's regulatory reform. Some of the huge innovative advances that were made out of necessity need to get crystallized into a much more flexible and fleet of foot process that's embedded rather than just in a response to a specific event. So I would really like to see investment in your thought and investment in infrastructure and regulatory reform as a key underpinning element of a future therapeutics, diagnostics, and intervention strategies.
Thank you. No, I think those are really excellent points, particularly on the regulatory side. Bernie.
Yes, so similarly, so bearing in mind that at least one prototype vaccine was available about 24 hours after the sequence of the COVID bug was revealed, and yet it was 9-10 months before it got to people's arms. What do we need to do to make it different the next time? But bearing in mind that the next epidemic organism is highly unlikely to be just like SARS-CoV-2. So who is going to pay for the infrastructure that is needed in advance to have the science and the scale up and the manufacture and fleet of foot tech transfer processes in place for perhaps 10, 20, with a bit of luck, longer years before we have the next pandemic?
I see. Really good question, Bernie. Who's going to pay for it? Well, you have to look at this the other way around, right? If we don't do it, it's going to cost us hundreds of trillions again, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be governments, right? Because I'm sure industry, investors, and insurance companies lost a lot of money out of the COVID pandemic, which loops me back to the comments earlier about blended finance. We need to bring these other types of investors in who perhaps hadn't thought of it in this way before, but they're sure thinking about it now because they've seen the potential losses that are out there for the world economy in the event of doing nothing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and actually that's got to be the lever that we use. We are coming to the end of the session now. I really wanted to ask, is there anything else any of you want to quickly say that you feel hasn't been covered? Maybe you have a last minute soundbite for the audience.
I'd just like to encourage this translational element, which is the development of the individuals, the new researchers, and instilling some entrepreneurship in them so that they think about creating an enterprise or doing something different, because they're going to be the people that are running the UK blockbuster companies of the future. So we need to invest in those people as well as the programs and the science.
Yeah, I agree. That's an excellent point.
And facilitating secondments and real exchanges amongst each of the players, industry, academia, but also government, because, for example, many of the government-associated research entities have critical national infrastructure that is not going to be replicated in universities and is unlikely to be fundable for industry.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what Bernie said, and just to reiterate and concur with Pete, I think it is about investment in individuals and ensuring that the researchers of the future actually actively consider translation, and that it is part of their research journey and their career, and that it's something that can be supported and nurtured from the beginning to enable the entrepreneurs and the real impact of UK research funding in the UK university system.
Richard, do you have any comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, just one from me. Now, it's a fascinating discussion today. I think it's important that we invest in the future in the whole research, translation and innovation ecosystem, recognizing that patient benefit and societal impact don't happen without industry-led innovation. And we need to make sure that there is a continuous journey and pathway through for innovation through that landscape. And secondly, to learn from what's worked. Sir John Bell said recently the UK didn't elbow its way to the front of the global COVID-19 vaccine call. We were at the front of the queue already. And that was through things like investment in the SBRI Vaccines for Emerging Epidemics program back in 2016 by the Department of Health and Social Care, global health security team that we've managed and delivered for them. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from what did go well, and we should include that in our thinking for the future.
Thanks very much. I think that's there've been some great points, and it's been a really informative and enjoyable discussion. So thank you all for your time, and I will switch over to Aline now.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you all. And thank you for the wise word shared at the end. I thought it was a really good comment. The session was a lot about funding, de-risking the early stage and translational research. And I think the key point I would keep on that is it's not just about the money and the money we can get from government, it's also the support, which is equally important. And so feeding that back on what type of support is available, it is needed, it's very important. It's also mobilizing more diverse sources of funding. As Pete highlighted, this whole private money that is there. It's just finding a way of making it more appealing, less risky, blending this money with public funding, very important too. And finally, I have to highlight this key point about building connections, building networks and ecosystem, because it's also the whole reason why we're here. I'm not saying it's the easiest to do, but that's what we're trying to do here. And that is transitioning very nicely to the next panel that is coming up in 5 minutes. So if you bear with us, I'm thanking the panels again. Really good to have you here. And I'll see you everyone for the Scaling Up a Biotech Ecosystem session in 5 minutes. Thank you.